Welcome back on The Leaders Who Care. Today we have a privilege to welcome a very special guest with whom we'll be talking a lot about frameworks. I have the privilege to welcome Marilyn Zakhour, a CEO and founder of Cosmic Centaurs organization, development consultancy, helping leaders make smarter decisions about work and implement sustainable organizational change. She's also very much referred as the person to call when you have a difficult and complex decision to make, the queen of decisions. With a decade of scaling startups and digital native companies, plus an experience as a CMO of EMAAR, one of the leading companies in Dubai. Whoever's been there will have seen them. And she was also the head of Dubai Opera. Marilyn knows what it takes to bring a startup agility into the world of big business as well. So, first of all, Marilyn, welcome. Thank you for joining us on The Leaders Who Care.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
I hope you're ready, because today we'll be stepping into the hot seat. And for the audience, the format is I'll be taking the role of a seasoned leader or CEO who has spent years of relying on gut instinct. And I'll be challenging Marilyn's frameworks. After navigating a complex, high-stake decisions, I'm skeptical about rigid frameworks. And to me, they often feel like a crunch, slowing leaders down, making them lazy. And of course, that doesn't reflect my true self. I will be just playing that role. As for the audience, we want to ask those difficult questions and comfortable questions to get to the bottom of it. So today we'll be tackling an old age debate: instinct versus intention. And are structured frameworks truly enabling leadership, or they're just the latest buzzword in the world of overcomplicating common sense? So, first challenge as a leader, I'm leading a team and I want to make them independent, really to hustle and use intuition, creativity. And the first challenge is adding a framework may remove this creative thinking. And I don't want my team to think mechanically and robotically. So are frameworks here to help? Are there any frameworks that really can do that, or rather than stunt development and independent thinking?
I said this to you when I met you, and I'll say it again. I think it's really a fun way to look at a problem, to have two people debate it. I don't think we have enough debate in the world. And so I'm really looking forward to this. Thank you for asking that question. Look, I mean, first you have to understand what frameworks are, right? They're intelligence of, usually coming out of academics or consultants, that have been created over observing how companies or leaders or specific situations, how they come to good outcomes. And so as a leader, I understand the need for speed. As you mentioned, I live in Dubai, and Dubai was a city that was built in less than 60 years. My mother is older than Dubai, but when I look at everything that's been developed here, I can only agree and understand that speed is of the essence, especially in our world today. The question is, are you in a haste to make a mistake, right? So sending people out into the world and saying, oh, just follow your gut feeling, your instinct, your creativity. It's a wonderful to give them this level of empowerment. But empowerment needs to come with education. So you may not know this, but if you have been able to make decisions that you feel have been good decisions over decades of your career, it's probably because you were guided by things you learned, the wisdom of others. Think of frameworks as a form of the wisdom of others. So, of course, you want people to be agile, to hustle, and that's certainly something that you can instill into your culture. But if you want to increase their chances of succeeding, because how many failures are you really going to grant them? Are you going to say, it's okay, go ahead and make 30 mistakes, I'm going to be cool with it because I understand you're hustling? Or are you expecting that their success rate is going to be a bit higher? And I think that when we empower people on our teams, we forget that it is also our duty to enable them. And what do we enable people with? Things that they learn, new skills, new capabilities. So frameworks are really just a way to teach people new ways of looking at the world, to give them a bit of backbone, something that others have experienced and has led to them being successful, so that when they're faced with a situation, they don't only rely on their gut feeling, but on your wisdom as a leader and the wisdom of others before you. So I don't know how that would inhibit speed, as long as you teach them these things and they integrate them into their ways of thinking. It's not like they have to, they're in the middle of a pitch to a client and they have to stop and take out a framework and be like, wait, I need to read this to be able to tell you how I'm going to respond. As long as they integrate all of this learning and it becomes part of who they are.
You talk about frameworks enabling better decisions, Marley. So, but don't they give people cover to avoid real accountability?
Well, I mean, it depends how you choose to use frameworks. So let's start with like, what is a framework? A framework is generally a diagram or a visual representation that allows you to simplify something that is complex. So I would argue the opposite, that if you're able to simplify complex things, it actually allows you to accelerate, because it allows you to see what is essential while making sure that you don't forget what is important.
Okay, that's interesting.
Let's take an example.
Yeah.
Is there a framework you particularly love or hate?
Well, me?
Yeah.
Let's say a framework of, sometimes they tell you obviously what to do when you, what regime to follow or to get health in check, for example. It's
well, that's not really a framework. I mean, I think, look, in the world, in the sense that it is a recommendation or a protocol, but not a framework. But what I mean by this is, what I mean by frameworks, and you'll often find these, let's say, at least in the corporate world, you'll find these in the realms of strategy or marketing or user experience design, is that someone who's very smart, usually an academic, sometimes a consultant, who has seen something happen over and over and over again, is able to distill that learning into something that they can share easily with others. A lot of the frameworks that we're taught, I don't know, in business school, if you've ever done an MBA, that's some of the first stuff you'll learn, are like strategy frameworks from Porter, or customer segmentation frameworks in the marketing realm, or value proposition frameworks. And actually, I think that the beauty of frameworks is that they take something that is complex and difficult to understand, and they allow you to visualize it in a way that feels intuitive, or at least easy to grasp. They allow you to rally people around something. So if I were to say, tell me, what are the forces that are threatening your business? And you just make a big list, versus I say, well, Michael Porter has the 5 forces framework that look at everything from your suppliers to your clients to your users to so on. And let's just look at these categories and fill them up together. The nice thing about a framework is, A, it allows you to make sure you didn't forget something, because typically the person who developed them has spent some time making sure they're kind of exhaustive. And B, they allow you to have a conversation with other people, because inevitably, if we're building something important, we're not doing it alone, in order to show them your way of thinking and the information that you're using in order to make a decision.
Look, the founders, executives operating at full speed, surely they sometimes they can't afford to stop building a framework. But I like what you just said, of distilling the best practices. So I've seen leaders that they know what to do. They know how to operate in a crisis management, let's say in operational space. There's an operational crisis and they know what to do, but they haven't necessarily developed a framework. They know what to do. So may not be able to articulate to everyone else exactly what are the steps and pass it to someone else. Isn't gut instinct faster and often right?
Well, yes, instinct can sometimes be a lot faster. And actually, in some ways, instinct is your own internal framework that you are able to apply at light speed.
Okay.
And actually, when you learn frameworks for a long time, you don't necessarily ever stop to document one anymore. They become mental models, right? So when you learn these frameworks, if you practice them enough, you don't actually say, wait, everybody, let's stop to complete this slide that has these things, but you have them in your mind and in your brain, and you're able to say, have we considered these things? Did we forget something, right? And so in some ways, instinct is a framework that is not explicit, that is in your mind, and that you're able to apply really fast. So yes, of course, in certain situations, leaders have to be in a style of dictating or single-handed. They can't be in a situation of consensus or convincing or negotiation. They have to be in a situation of making decisions moving fast. But in fact, they are using a framework. The difference is they have not made it explicit. And I think that the reason why I really push leaders to do this, and I'm sure you've experienced that, is that we succeed, actually, typically, individuals succeed because they have some form of intuitive ability to drive, to complete things, to make decent decisions. We don't know where it came from, how they were brought up, what they learned, doesn't matter. But at some point in your career, when you start to lead more and more people, you end up becoming the bottleneck. And you end up feeling like everything has to go through me. The people around me don't know how to make good decisions. You end up being tired, really. And in leadership development, we call this reactive strengths. So we call these the strengths that you were kind of naturally equipped with. They're the ones that got you to where you are. But if you want to continue scaling, you find that now you have to build a system around you. And a system comes through being able to make explicit what you do implicitly, so that your number two and their number two, if they're faced with a situation, they would think about it in the same way that you would. So frameworks are also a great way to transfer knowledge, because otherwise it's tacit, so it's implicit. And people may not be able to repeat it or to act in the way that you would have wanted them to act, unless you try to make things explicit for them.
Okay. No, I remember one of the leaders that was a very successful multi-billionaire. He actually his secret was very simple. By the time anyone thought of a decision or thought about what to do, he would have already acted so fast. Somebody shares an idea, within a few hours, he's already called the people and started really testing. And I think in Korea, they have this model. Instead of doing research where to open a new supermarket, a new shop, they just open it and test it, and see if it works, it works. If it doesn't, then just move on. But I hear you, and I think I understand where you're coming from, of how to remove yourself and yet still pass your knowledge. So what you just said of externalizing your internal frameworks, that's interesting.
Yeah, I also really love the example you gave, but I'm going to show you how it actually is part of a framework. So if you go online now and you Google kind of the steps to a good decision-making process, some of the first steps is situational analysis or collecting data, right? You can collect data through research, and you can collect data through experimentation.
Yeah.
You're still collecting data. So in the end, you haven't yet made a decision to open 100 supermarkets in South Korea. You just made the decision to put out an experiment in the world because you say, I don't know enough, and I don't feel like the data that I can research or the reports are going to tell me enough. So I need to figure out a new data collection measure. Don't mistake data collection with action, because the real decision that needs to be made is, are we going to invest $1 billion opening 100 supermarkets in South Korea? The decision of putting one out is actually an experiment. And I think it's when we mislabel things. And so we think that, oh, look at these, they're so slow. Why is it taking them so long? I understand, by the way, the frustrations of leaders that see that their people hide behind the data collection phase. So I'm not, I am one of them. You can ask my team, like, speed is one of our, requirements. But I used to have a boss who said it beautifully. He said, I'm not in a hurry to make a bad decision. So there's a difference between the ability to execute at speed once you understand what you're doing, and simply making decisions left and right and leaving it to probability whether you end up having made a good one or not.
Okay, how do you distinguish between the two?
The things that are fast action versus erratic decision making.
Yeah, how do you kind of differentiate what because someone said you just need to make as many fast decisions as possible, and then you just train yourself eventually to make better decisions. So you know you're starting with a lot of that, but okay, you know, it's where's the
That's a good
balance?
one. So I think good decisions are decisions where if I took you back in time, so because we always say you cannot judge a good decision by the quality of its outcome. There's so much in the world you don't control, right? So you could have made a good decision, but something happened that was not predictable to you that led to this decision having a negative outcome.
Mhm.
So then how can we judge good decisions? We judge good decisions by the quality of the process. This means that if you make a decision today, Marian, like for example, to experiment with this, opening a supermarket and seeing what happens. If I took you back in time, and then let's say it fails or it doesn't matter what happens later. But if a year from now, I take you back to today and I say, Marian, if you knew everything you knew at this moment, would you still make the same decision? And you say yes, then that was a good decision. In the sense that a good decision collects enough data, not too much, but enough data to feel like it's well informed. A good decision defines the problem accurately. So a good decision is first and foremost reframing the question. And then it's using, there are beautiful mental models and decision-making frameworks or techniques, things like, for example, second order thinking, things like inversion, that allow you to simply...
Tell us a little bit more about that second order thinking and inversion. What do you mean?
Yeah. So here's a simple one. A lot of us, when we think about the decision, we think about it and we say, okay, what will happen if I do this? Okay, this will happen. We think of the decision in and of itself. But actually, the best way to make a decision is to continue down that line for a little bit longer. Meaning, if I take decision A, I don't know, we can, the easy ones that we always talk about, like what you're going to eat for lunch. If I get dessert, I'm going to be happy. Okay. But let's look at the broader context. If you get dessert now, what happens after? And then what happens? And then what happens? So what we see is human beings are typically motivated to only make short-term decisions. It's our nature, right? Because we are impulsive. And so thinking through time, like what happens after? What happens after? You might realize that you would have gone with decision A, but if you look at the consequences of that decision through time, you will actually change your mind and you'll end up going with decision B. So that's an example. So what we say about these decision-making approaches is that each of these frameworks, by the way, offers a partial view of the world. So second-order thinking might lead you to decide to go with option B. But there are other decision-making frameworks that allow you to kind of look at it from all the different directions, right? There are mental models that allow you to make sure you're not misinterpreting or having a bias in how you're making a decision. You can say, I'm going to make a decision from first principles. So for example, what are your first principles? Well, in my case, I have these values that I'm not willing to compromise on. So if my values are different from yours, I will make a different decision as an outcome of that. And so all I'm saying is, and again, I'm not saying take a week to do this. A lot of the decisions we have to do are done on the go and at speed. But if you build these mental models, if you educate yourself and develop your toolbox, then as you're making a decision, you have the capacity to decide really what is the correct route and not simply to fall into, your biases, your short-term mindedness, and so on. And I think I'll say one more thing about this, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts, is that one of the key mistakes that people make in decisions is thinking that they have to make a yes-no decision. So again, going back to your supermarket example, do we open the supermarket or not? But actually, when you reframe the problem and you say, okay, well, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to identify whether there's an opportunity in the market. Then you can say, okay, so wait, the decision is not about opening the supermarket or not. The decision is about what are the different ways in which I can find a good opportunity in the market, and which one do I think is better? In which case you might say, oh, I can do focus groups, I can do interviews, I can commission someone, I can go and talk to people who shut down their supermarkets and understand why. So you suddenly, instead of looking at one choice and saying yes or no, you can look at 10 choices and compare them to each other. And you might end up finding that there's a cheaper way to get this information than to simply open a test supermarket.
Okay, well, for me, it's interesting how what I notice, a lot of people make decisions based on emotions. So they are putting the emotions first, which I think it's really completely wrong. Just emotions, they matter, but not really as the first principle, first way. Personally, the way I look at things is first of all wisdom. When there's a problem to make a decision, you look at what is the wisdom there, what is written around this, what people have done in this situation. And for me, it's like I look at scripture. What does it say about this problem? Because it's not from me. So like look at the wisdom of that. Then what I do secondly, I look at what you just said something earlier, which may be very similar. I kind of look at, can I defend the consequences of this decision for many years to come? Meaning discernment. So can I almost see what could happen in a multiple context form, not just in a short, especially if it's an important decision, maybe not necessarily for dessert, but if I eat dessert every day multiple times, that may have a serious consequence on my health, for example. But just, and then emotion is still important, but I put it last, because when you kind of put it first, is the order is kind of just, yeah, because you can feel really bad at the moment, you may feel really, and then next day, they say you don't make a decision in the evening, you do it in the morning. Like, it's just feelings change. They can vary. Somebody may have insulted you. Some people may take a decision. Oh, do I stay with this partner? Do I get divorced? Well, emotionally, at that moment, you may feel really bad and say that's it. But actually, when you start looking at what's the consequences for everything else, you start, you know what? Maybe it's not the person opposite. Maybe it's me. Maybe I need to look at what have I done to lead to this consequences. Like just a little bit of a wisdom. So that's a little framework that I've developed. I don't know. Maybe that's something that
there you go.
Describe, because everything is
that is exactly it. You have your own process for this. Well, look, I mean, when it comes to emotions, I think in some ways I agree with you, and maybe I'll just add to that. I don't think we should dismiss our emotions when we're making decisions.
No, not at all.
First of all, because when our emotions are there to help us, by the way. Like, if you think about what is the evolutionary purpose of feeling anxiety or fear or anger, actually all of these emotions are unspoken messages. So I think what you should do is that when you feel an emotion related to a specific decision, you should name it. I do this a lot with my team. I'm like, by the way, team, around this decision, I feel this way. So I'm just going to let you all know, so that if you feel like I'm being biased by this feeling, that you correct me. But also, this feeling is a source of wisdom, because it's telling me something. It's telling me, be careful. There's a risk you're not seeing. There's a trap you haven't named. So emotions can also be good advisors. As long as, exactly what you say, you name them, you listen to what they have to tell you, you integrate it as a data point, but you don't let them take control of the decision.
That's very smart. Okay. You say that structured decision making fuels creativity. How does structure not kill innovation?
I mean, whoever thinks that structure kills innovation doesn't understand what innovation is. Because it doesn't mean that you should only have structure. But innovation is different from invention. So I always make that distinction.
Okay.
Inventors can die very poor and with no one using their products. Innovation is about bringing new experiences, products, services at scale. You don't do anything at scale without structure. Structure, in fact, will set you free. Even in brainstormings, if I sit a bunch of people and I say, okay, guys, come up with ideas. How many times have you been in that room and everybody's like, no idea how to do this? Versus I say, no, we're going to have a structure to this. First, we're going to think about what our purpose is. Second, we're going to reflect on who we are hoping to target with this product. And third, we're going to think about what they need and their pain points. And then we're going to come up with solutions. Now suddenly everyone has ideas. So I actually think that this idea that creativity is something that happens in a vacuum on a white page without structure, I'm not sure where it comes from, but it may come from people who are individual creators, you know, poets, people who are in their lab doing their own thing, where structure felt constraining to them. But for most people, structure actually breeds freedom.
That's an interesting way of looking at it. Yes. Okay. Especially the scalability. I'm curious, right? Is there a risk that leaders outsource their thinking to frameworks? Where is the balance instead of building real judgment all the time?
What a great
what
question.
you're saying is just you develop your internal frameworks, but how does that integrate in with the business frameworks?
It's a great question. I used to have a strategy professor at business school who is the one who taught me many of the frameworks that I know, who used to say, look, if as a leader, you don't have a good intuition about what the potential right way forward is, then you shouldn't be making any strategy decisions. However, the frameworks serve a couple of purposes. The first is to make sure you didn't forget something, because humans over-index on information that validate their decision, right? We know that. We know about these biases. It's called affirmation or confirmation bias. So the framework is there to make sure you didn't blindside yourself, that you didn't miss something. And second of all, the framework is there for you to communicate what you think to others, to convince them that this is the right way forward. Because the biggest barrier to delivering on a decision or a strategy is not the strategy itself. It's the ability of everybody around you to understand it and get behind it and then go into action. We know this. 90% of strategy don't get executed, not because the strategy was bad, but because we didn't figure out how to get people to actually deliver on it. And so I think the frameworks are a great way to simplify complex things, to align people on a decision that is being made so that they may then go out and actually do the work, because in the end, the decision in and of itself has no value.
What are your experience really, and how entrepreneurs look at this? Entrepreneurs is quite unique, right? This is where the venture capital, they fast, they move fast. The world is kind of quite uncertain today. So, you're just really thinking of one frameworks and process heavy thinking, really impact the entrepreneurs, founders, original spirit.
That's a really great question. And I'll start by saying that I know we've glorified entrepreneurs, but we should also make sure that we understand their success rate.
Okay.
Because one entrepreneur may be very successful, but if you take all entrepreneurs that a VC or whatever invests in, the probability of success is very low. So I'm not sure that all entrepreneurs are great decision makers, but maybe that's not what they're asked to be, right? So I think what entrepreneurs are, real entrepreneurs, because for example, I have a company, but I don't call myself an entrepreneur because I'm a business owner. But entrepreneurs that are trying to kind of sense something that is emerging that other people haven't sensed yet, and create a response that is value creating, they exist in a world where best practices and frameworks don't apply, right? So if anyone's familiar with the Canavan framework that kind of goes from ordered to chaotic, and then there's complexity somewhere in the middle, which is emerging things. It is true that a lot of the frameworks...
What is about that? Sorry, just clarifying for the audience, this framework, what is it called?
So it's called the Cynefin, but it's a Welsh word. So the way it's spelt is Cynefin.
Okay.
And it's a framework that kind of tries to explain that, as individuals, leaders, we may be in different environments. Some environments are ordered or clear. Some are complicated, but still we can figure them out. So we have best practices for them. So let's say flying a plane is a complicated word, but we know how to do it, right? So nothing is emerging, hopefully, when you're flying a plane. But a lot of us, especially entrepreneurs, live in a complex world. That's a place where things are emerging. The relationship between cause and effect is not always obvious to everyone. And in an environment like that, you have to be an adaptive leader, right? And so nothing there is going to tell you what the response should be, but you have to develop this capacity to probe, test the system. Just the example you gave me earlier, let's open a small shop, see what happens. So you have to be able to sense things. And yes, in that world, it may be that some of the old frameworks don't apply. And we've certainly seen companies where academics look at them and say, oh, I need to invent a new framework because these guys just did something that my old way of looking at the problem doesn't account for. So we do see, the frameworks are lagging behind the real disruptor and entrepreneurs. But truth be told, how many companies can we name that really have disrupted the world versus how many companies that just deliver good, solid, sustainable value are there? And most of us are not working for Alibaba 20 years ago. Most of us are working for solid, sustainable businesses. And so, of course, if you're in a completely disruptive mode, maybe some of these frameworks will not be useful to you, or they will give you an answer that you don't want to hear because you're building something no one's done before. But how many of us actually do that in our lives? I'm certainly not one of them.
That's very interesting and a good perspective. In the beginning, you talked about the different frameworks. What are they? How do we approach frameworks, from a broad term? So looking at what you've studied, your kind of best practices, do you group frameworks in different fields? Because I'm sure you have probably lots of frameworks. How many frameworks do you even know?
I don't think I've kept count of how many frameworks I know at this point. My team always laughs because I'm like, oh, wait, there's a framework for this. That's my favorite. I also think there's a lot of, if you don't mind my language, crappy frameworks or lists that are disguised as frameworks out there.
Yes.
You'll see a lot of them on LinkedIn. I'm sure I made some up as well throughout my career where there was no real research or science behind, just an intuition about how something works. But I think, the idea of a framework is that it's like a map. I think that's also a good way to look at it, right? Like a map of the subway doesn't really represent how the subway works, but it is a way for us to simplify information so that we can make better decisions. And so you see frameworks in a lot of spaces. Again,
listening to you, how do we know what's a great framework? How can we distinguish good and bad frameworks when we look at it?
Oh, that's a good one. I think, well, first of all, to be on the safe side, good frameworks last the test of time. So they were true 200 years ago, and they're still true today. And actually, a lot of the frameworks that people use are 40, 50, 60 years old. They just don't know that. For example, the BCG matrix, this 2x2 that everybody loves to use, like you put quality and price or this and that, and you always need to be on the top right of that matrix. That's a few decades old. All the Michael Porter stuff, a few decades old. So actually there are frameworks that we still use to this day that might be from a century ago. And I think, so that's a safe way to assess a framework. And I think what you want is that it has a real academic theory behind it with proper research, that the person who's made it up has actually gone through the work of seeing how it is applied in other organizations, in many organizations, so that you can be assured that this framework in action has actually worked. Now, there's also, in addition to frameworks, I'm going to introduce a layer of complexity here. There's also things like mental models. I don't know if you're familiar with that term.
Yeah, that's more.
Yeah, so a mental model is, let's say, again, it's very similar to a framework. It's a simplification of how the world works. So a simple mental model is cause and effect. Or another mental model that sometimes people know is the 80-20 rule. I don't know if you've come across that. Like 80% of the effort, that's called the Pareto, rule, or the Pareto principle. There are things like Occam's razor or Hanlon's razor. And actually, I'll recommend to your audience, and I always recommend this website. There's an incredible website called Farnham Street, and the URL is fs.blog. And what this guy has done is that I think for more than a decade now, actually even probably longer than that, he's been collecting mental models. And he collects them from all sorts of places, from physics, from math, from chemistry, from systems thinking, from the military, from human nature. There's a lot of these things that describe the world that just allow us to say like, oh, this is what's happening here, right? Second order thinking, for example, is a mental model, as we were talking earlier. Probabilistic thinking. So what is the probability that something will happen? That's a mental model. So these are like small little tools that you can use when you're trying to think about a problem and understand it better.
That's very helpful. We'll put it in the link. So thank you for sharing that. But for leaders, just thinking here, like, what is your favorite framework? Or is there such a thing for you? Because everything is a framework. Or top three. What are the top three frameworks that helped you the most? Put it that way.
Oh, that's a tough one. I can't. It's like asking me who my favorite child is.
That's the thing. You know so many frameworks.
This is the other problem. Look, I mean, I think I have favorite mental models, but not favorite frameworks. And maybe I can tell you why. Because I think the framework is, so again, like I said, there are frameworks from strategy, from finance, from marketing, for personal development, for whatever, innovation, leadership. So I think I don't have a favorite framework because I think they are so specific to the context where you need them, that my favorite is the one that is useful for this decision, right? It's so hard to say that. I do have mental models that I come back to a lot. For example, the map is not the territory is a mental model I come back to a lot, which is to say that the simplification of something, in order to simplify something and make it easy to communicate, you have to remove layers of depth and detail. And so I must never confuse the framework for the territory. It's, again, a good way to like go back and say, like, don't forget, just because this thing allows you to, narrow things down to one diagram or one visual doesn't mean it represents the world. So, for example, not forgetting to look up for a little bit and realize that the world is more complex than what the framework is telling me that it is. Another one that I like a lot is called Hanlon's razor. And it's this idea that when something bad happens, we humans have this automatic response to think that someone somewhere was trying to mess things up. Let's say something horrible happens. I come from a country where things explode all the time. And every time that happens, we like to blame someone. But Hanlon's razor says that actually most bad things in the world come from incompetence, not maliciousness. So small things like that, I think, that allow you to look at a situation and just reassess it, not with your immediate reaction or instinct, but being able to zoom out and take perspective, I think.
And thank you so much for being very helpful with some of your insights on approach and frameworks. Definitely, you inspire a lot of thought here. And but here's really something valuable for the audience is for leaders who are navigating chaos and complexity. What are 2-3 practical ways to use frameworks without losing speed, instinct, or originality? What would be your take on this?
I mean, honestly, the first one is educate yourself when you don't need it. I think that
Okay.
the best way is to learn about these things all the time so that when the moment comes where you have to make a decision with haste, you have all of these things stored in your head and you can pull out what is useful to you. So that would be my first piece of advice. I think my second piece of advice is to decide when you need to decide. So a big part of a good decision is understanding its constraints. Is it really as urgent as I think it is? Just take a moment to hesitate on that and to understand whether the speed that you think you need to make this decision at is true or whether you're inventing the urgency. And I think the third one, honestly, is just follow the process. Hesitate, redefine the problem, collect as much data as you can with the time that you have. So if it's 30 minutes, use those 30 minutes to learn more. If it's 2 days, use those 2 days to learn more. Apply all of the various kind of models that you like. Again, probabilistic thinking, second order effect, inversion, first principles, whatever you like. It's like when you value a company, right? So when an investor is trying to do a valuation for a company, they use many different methods. They use the EBITDA, they use the free cash flow method, they look at comparable businesses and what they sold for. So all I'm saying is use as many methods as you can so that you can triangulate towards the best decision. And I'm not saying to ignore your gut, because your gut sometimes is kind of unexpressed intelligence, but I'm just saying your gut is only one data point, or it's only one outcome of a model, your internal model. But use the others to just sanity check that what your gut is telling you makes sense in other contexts.
Very well. And final question, Marilyn, if you had unlimited resources and pretty much all the power in the world, what is one thing that you would like to change to make the world a
In
better
the
place?
universe?
Yes.
Well, for me, I'd like to have leaders, and it's funny because your podcast is called Leaders Who Care, and it's so central to my belief that we're not just leaders of businesses, we're not just there to manage a P&L. Of course, we should also do all of those things, but we are leaders of communities, whether we realize it or not. We are leaders of people. And for every leader to truly integrate this idea that the duty of care is with them, and that they can change the world simply by creating better workplaces or making better decisions or creating good environments for their people is already a great way to make the world a better place.
Very close to what my passion is as well, and how can we take care of those leaders so they can create environments where people can thrive, not survive. So really, really closely aligned. Thank you so much. If anybody is interested and wants your advice and help, what's the best way to get in touch with you? Is there any recommendation how to reach out?
I mean, they can either go on cosmiccentaurs.com and they'll be able to even book time with me if they wanted it. They can go on LinkedIn and find me there. I try to respond to everybody who messages me. I don't think there's anyone I hasn't, maybe not on the same day, but usually within a week or two, you will hear back from me. And if anyone wants to talk about this stuff, needs help with a decision, I'm known for being the person that people come to when they're trying to make a difficult decision. I am all ears and I'm available, even if I don't know you. I'm willing to help.
Excellent. Marian, thank you so much. Blessings to you in your work, in your family, and thank you for taking the time once again.